Hey guys, college football update, week 10. Really getting into the meat and kind of the somewhat of the tail end of the college football season here. So, as always, we're going to start with Notre Dame. We'll start with Notre Dame's game against Virginia Tech. Notre Dame beats Virginia Tech 21 to 20. Look, I said going into this game that if Notre Dame lost it, I would not be happy because I did not think Virginia Tech was a very good team. I still think that's the case. I think Notre Dame was the one that shot themselves in the foot throughout the game. Two or three red zone turnovers. The fumble right before halftime by Jafar Armstrong at the goal line. Virginia Tech picking it up and running a 98 yards with 9 seconds left to tie the score at 14 all. As far as when you're talking about a college football game, more than the NFL, way more than the NFL. There's always these things that happen in a game where it reverses what may be happening. So something positive may happen, and then something, at least if you're a Notre Dame fan, something negative happens, and it just reverses what could have just happened. It sounds really silly to say that, but where I'm going with it is that when something goes against your team that's that big of a deal, it completely changes the dynamic of how that game is going to end or how that game is going to go forward. Look, I mean, the reality is Virginia Tech had, I don't know, 200 and some odd yards of total offense. Notre Dame had 450 or so. They won the game in all facets, including the score, but, the score just didn't indicate how much they won it by. To be honest with you, I don't care that they only beat them 21 to 20. It doesn't matter to me at this point how Notre Dame wins games. I mean, especially, again, when you're talking about college football, there are these, there's hangovers. Again, more than the NFL, there's hangovers where week to week, if you get destroyed the week before, like Notre Dame did against Michigan, they're going to come in and be very lackadaisical that next week, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they played, just kind of down and weren't loose, and they were very tight. There's a lot of pressure on them, to try to win the game. So they did. It's fine. Hey, 21-20, I'll take it. I don't care at this point. It's just about trying to finish out games, finish out the season. And look, I mentioned this before. If Notre Dame is able to even just get to 10 wins, it'll be the first time since the 90s that they've done that. Now, am I happy about that as a fan? I am not. But is it the reality of where we are as a program? Yes, it is. So, for me, I want them to get to 10 wins. I'd love for them to get to 11 wins, win a bowl game. That would be incredible. Because, again, I think it would, catapult them into the next season. I already said last week that hiring Urban Meyer or hiring anybody else is just not a good idea. I don't think Brian Kelly is going to win a national championship necessarily, but I do feel that he has them on the right path. If and when he does either retire, I don't think he's going to get fired, but when he retires from Notre Dame, I think he's going to have a good record. I think he's going to be a good coach, just not up to historic Notre Dame standards, but I think he'll be fine. So again, let's just finish out the season. They should be able to win all the games that they got left. So we'll see what happens. All right, moving on. And by the way, nobody says anything about Auburn when they beat Ole Miss 20-14. People were like, "Oh, it's a great win." Come on, just win the game and then forget about it. You just move on. You check the box anyway. So some teams that I have been paying attention to, that I think just interesting what they've been able to do thus far this season. Let's talk about the Oregon State Beavers. I mean, what is happening? I mean, Oregon State is 4-4. I'll tell you, going into the year, I thought they'd win 4 games total. So they've already, gotten to where, I kind of figured they might get to. So, look, huge game against Washington. I understand Washington is absolute disappointment at 5-4 this year, but it's a huge game for Oregon State at home, 10:30 at night, I think, on FS1. I'd love a late night game in Corvallis. It just doesn't get a whole lot better. So, love to see that. I think that's going to be a big game for Oregon State if they're able to win that. I absolutely think they're going to go to a bowl game. If they lose it, I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough for them to get to 6 wins. Just looking at their schedule, I think it's going to be tight. But this is the big game that they need to win. So, man, just a great job by Jonathan Smith. I mean, look, this is what happens when you've got a guy who loves to be there, a guy who wants to be at the school. He's able to really, be passionate about it and make things happen. So great job where Oregon State just really has overachieved in my mind this year. Some of the schools that I've been really tough on and are now 4-5. Tennessee, had a really nice win against a good UAB team this last weekend. And then UCLA was able to beat Colorado. I think they won 31-14. So UCLA may be clicking now. Look, I still think it's a disappointment. I still think Chip Kelly is not the answer. You have to recruit. He is not recruiting. He's playing with Jim Mora's players. So I'm still going to keep saying it. You got to recruit. If you look at UCLA's recruiting class, not good. Tennessee's is fine because it's an SEC school. I definitely still not really buying into this Pruitt thing. I just, again, don't really feel great about him as a head coach. But, hey, they're both 4-5. If they get to bowl eligibility, that would be huge for both of those programs. So, we'll see. We'll see what they're able to do. I think that win by Tennessee against South Carolina really helped them get to where they may be able to get to this year. I think that was the difference between bowl eligibility and not. So, huge win. And that happens throughout the season. Things like that are going to happen and kind of get them to where they need to go. Indiana is 7-2. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying here? Indiana is 7-2. Not since the Bill Mallory years in the 80s has Indiana been this good. And I am loving the fact that they are this good because Tom Allen, who's the head coach at Indiana, he's an Indiana. I think he grew up in Indiana or he lived in Indiana. I can't remember exactly what, but he wants to be there. He wants to be in Indiana. Who wants to be in Indiana as the head football coach? He does. So, it's great to see a guy who actually is just, again, passionate about the school, wants to be there, wants to see them do well. Again, if you get to 6 wins at Indiana, they'll keep you forever. If you get to 8 or 9, again, you're getting into the Bill Mallory territory, the Anthony Johnson years in the 80s there or 90s. I mean, it's just fantastic. So we'll love to see what they're going to do. I'll be honest. I think they could get to 9 wins. Looking at their schedule, can you imagine Indiana going 9-3 or even 10-2? Just unbelievable. Speaking of which, Minnesota with a huge game this weekend against Penn State. If Minnesota is able to pull that off, which I kind of don't think they're going to, but if they could, can you imagine it's going to be like 1960 all over again? And by the way, Minnesota won the national championship in 1960. That's why I said it. So how great would that be? Just these Big Ten teams that aren't normally great, really kind of stepping up and doing some great things this year. I get it. Minnesota's not getting a lot of love. I think they were 17th in the first poll that came out last night. They should be. They really haven't played anybody. I mentioned that before, but it's still great for them to be undefeated. Florida State, I'll just touch on the fact that they fired Taggart. I think that's fine. Taggart wasn't doing anything. He was 9-12. You should not be 5-7 and then 4-5 with the talent that Florida State has. I get it. Their offensive line is a mess. I understand. Florida State can do whatever they want. They can get JUCO players. They can do whatever. To stabilize the program and then have the athletes to do whatever they got to do. Taggart was never going to get it done, and I'll tell you, look up Taggart's coaching record. His best season was at South Florida. He was 10-2 because 1 year. The rest of the time he was either he had one other season where he was 8-5. The rest of the time he was either 7-5 or he had a losing season. Tell me why, if you're Florida State, you would have hired him in the first place. Why would you think he was ever going to do good? I mean, again, best season was 10-2, second best season was 8-5, and then the other seasons he was 7-5, or he had a losing season. It doesn't even make any sense. I mean, if you really, 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 really think about it, what were they doing? And why would you buy out his contract from Oregon? I mean, he went 7-5 at Oregon, and they were like, "Oh, that's great job." It's Oregon, for God's sake. You don't go 7-5 at Oregon. Not at this point. 7-5 Oregon in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Fantastic. Oregon now, got to do better than that. One other thing I did want to touch on, do I think that Penn State should be number 4 in the standings? I do. I think there's a lot of conversation about that. Should Penn State have been there or Clemson have been there? Again, it is a strength of schedule thing. You're not going to get credit if you're Clemson for winning last year. Okay, it's all about this year. I understand if you're a Clemson fan, you're upset about it. It doesn't matter. If Clemson goes undefeated, they'll get there. But Penn State is getting a lot of credit for beating Michigan, and Michigan is getting a lot of credit for destroying Notre Dame, which fine. And because of that, Penn State's getting credit for beating Michigan, of course. So that's really what it was. I think that was the catalyst that really put Penn State at number 4. So there's yet another reason for everybody to hate Notre Dame, especially if you're a Clemson fan. I think we kind of did it to you. I think that's the reason that Penn State's number 4. Sorry. But, that's what you get for destroying Notre Dame in the Cotton Bowl. But anyway, little joke. All right, guys, enjoy the games this weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.